Yeah, it's been a busy spring transfer portal, but the Miami Hurricanes aren't done yet.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Not only are the Miami Hurricanes still actively looking for defensive players to join the team through the portal, friend of the show, Gio Milian, has reported that there will be more departures within the next couple of days. Now, how can that happen when the portal is technically closed now, at least closed for players to enter? Um, there could be certain guys who filed their paperwork by the deadline, which was midnight a couple nights ago, that have not been revealed yet or have not been reported yet. There's a lot going on, folks. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, longtime South Florida sports radio vet, and also co-host of Locked On ACC. Thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We're answering transfer portal questions on this episode from our Locked On Canes Insiders chat. And I figured they'd mostly be about defensive tackles. And I was correct on that. We get one from Parkland Dan, who says, "It's all defensive line, Dono. Can we get the DT from Michigan State and the DN from Tennessee? Is Moten ready to be in the two deep at defensive tackle, or will we need to line up defensive ends in the middle on a regular basis?" He says. All right, well, Simeon Barrow is the defensive tackle for Michigan State. Let me start with him because he's been a huge topic. It appears that his final three, maybe a dark horse could sneak into the finals, but it appears to be between the three schools that he has visited, and those are Miami, LSU, and Mizzou. And Simeon Barrow plans to make a decision by Sunday at the latest. Like, he's going to make a decision this weekend, maybe if he decides not to take another visit somewhere, which I think is the way this is trending. He could decide a little bit sooner, but I think at the very latest by Sunday, we're going to know where Barrow ends up. I do hear a lot of positivity from the Miami point of view. And an important distinction here is not only am I hearing positivity from a Miami side on being in pretty good shape with Barrow, you also hear some people who cover the rival teams who are looking at Miami potentially being the team to beat here. And that's usually a good sign when you have both of those factors. Because folks, when I'm looking at where Miami stands with a recruit or with a transfer portal player, I not only look to the Miami point of view, I also look to the point of views of others, and that usually gives you a more complete picture. Like, I don't strictly go the Homer route when I'm researching players and all that. So I do hear some positivity on Simeon Barrow. That's the DT for Michigan State. 6'3", 290 pounds, 1 year of eligibility remaining. He was arguably the best defensive player for the Spartans over the past two seasons. Now, I know that a lot of people look at his teammate, Derek Harmon, another defensive tackle who is not going to end up at Miami. Harmon is deciding between USC and Colorado. A lot of people look at Harmon, who is bigger, more of a space eater, and say, well, that's the guy who's going to be better in the long run. Maybe that's true, but based on the way the last two seasons have gone, Barrow has been the better player. He's also older. I think Barrow has 2 or 3 years of eligibility left, but Harmon has been the better player the last couple of years, and I think he's got a lot to give Miami or LSU or Mizzou in one final season. Generated 28 pressures last season, 36 tackles, 3.5 sacks. Also a very good run defender. 72.3 grade in 2023 against the run, had a 76.4 grade in 2022 against the run. And, I talk about what's coming out of rival fan bases. There's this weird thing where nobody counts money in Miami better than Florida State reporters and fans. Like, they seem to keep track of every cent. They know all the answers. This is what Miami's spending in NIL. Never mind the fact that that's not public information. They seem to always know. And I did see that Brendan Sinoni, a Florida State insider from 24/7 Sports, said that according to him, Miami is the team that has made by far the highest NIL offer for Barrow, and that they're going to have like the most expensive transfer class. Like, again, I don't know how he claims to know any of this, but he seems to be waving the white flag of surrender from a Florida State standpoint that Barrow is not likely to end up there. We'll see if it ends up being Miami, but I do hear some positives. And, when you talk about those narratives that come out of Tallahassee, depending on the day, some days the narrative is Miami's broke. Other days, Miami's buying players. Can't be both, can it? Pick a lane, pick a narrative, and roll with it. So as far as the other parts of Parkland Dan's question, I do say that Ahmad Moten had a good spring, and I think he is ready to be in the two deep. Absolutely. He asked about the defensive end from Tennessee. Miami is waiting on an answer from Tyler Barron. He was one of the visitors last weekend. Out of the 5 visitors last weekend, Barron is the only one who did not immediately commit to Miami. Miami went 4 for 5 last weekend. I think Barron is still under consideration. I think there could be other factors off the field from a medical standpoint and from an administrative standpoint that may be holding this up a little bit. Last I heard on him a couple days ago, felt pretty good about where Miami is, but I think there's a couple of hurdles you have to jump over before you land this player. But yeah, Tyler Barron, you mentioned him being Tennessee, and yes, Tennessee is the last team that he played for. The last roster he was on was Louisville. He transferred to Louisville and then immediately transferred away from the Cardinals after arriving there in January. So he is still available. We get a question that asks simply, hey, what other defensive tackles are Miami looking at if Simeon Barrow falls through? So you're asking about backup plans. I don't know if you take that as a positive sign on where they stand with Simeon Barrow, that I don't really feel like Miami is like scrambling to get other defensive tackles in for visits, which is probably something you'd be doing if you were pessimistic about where you stand with your number one target. I will say that if you are going to look at other possibilities, a guy that I've liked through the entire process, he has not picked a school yet, and he does have an offer from the University of Miami, is CJ West from Kent State. That's someone that Miami and LSU and a whole bunch of others have both offered and kicked the tires on. Very productive player. Of course, Kent State, not a Power 5 program or Power 4 program, but last year, 50 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, had a sack and a forced fumble against UCF, had a good game against them, 6'2", 315 pounds. So that could be potentially another option at defensive tackle if Miami is not fortunate enough to win the Simeon Barrow sweepstakes. I get a question saying, hey, what's the biggest remaining want and need out of the portal for you? Okay, so if you're asking my opinion, biggest want or need out of the portal. Now, let me put out an important note on the roster status, okay? As of today, Thursday, Miami is currently at 83 scholarships, and that includes the freshmen who are going to arrive in June. So technically, you're at 73. When you count the 10 freshmen arriving, you're at 83. So right now, Miami is 2 under the limit. So they could theoretically add 2 players, right? Now, I mentioned our guy Gio is saying that there are going to be more departures from Miami's roster that we find out about. So that could end up leaving Miami with 3 or 4 or 5 open spots. But if I'm going to assume, just for argument's sake, Miami adds 2 or 3 more players, because it is possible you get to fall camp under the limit and maybe you can land a grad transfer around that time. That has happened before. So if you're talking about my biggest wants out of the transfer portal, like my wish list would be, absolutely, if you can bring in Simeon Barrow, I'm going to be doing cartwheels. If you can bring in safety Jaden Mangham from Michigan State, I want to talk a little bit more about him on this episode. This is one, he got into the portal on Tuesday night, right before the deadline. This guy started almost every game for Michigan State, was an honorable mention Big Ten selection, had 4 interceptions last year. Jaden Mangham is a really, really good player. So right there, I mean, I want to ransack the entire Michigan State roster. I want the defensive tackle for Michigan State. I would have loved to have 2 defensive tackles from Michigan State. I want the safety from Michigan State. So Mangham would be the next guy on my wish list. I would also love to have the aforementioned Tyler Barron. So if I'm looking at adding 3 players, my wish list here would be Barrow, Mangham and Barron, and then I would feel very, very comfortable with Miami's additions versus subtractions in the transfer portal. And this has not even been mentioning what Miami's done on the offensive side of the football, bringing in Damian Martinez and Sam Brown after bringing in Cam Ward back in January. If Miami can finish up my wish list, Hurricanes should be a team that is competitive nationally, right? And I'll talk about my expectations a little bit because I got a question about that. But folks, we have so much more to talk about on this episode, including other teams using Miami's portal efforts as negative recruiting. What's going on there? Is Miami now, are they stronger than they were before the portal opened? Because yes, for all the additions, there have been subtractions as well. And someone's asking me if I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. We'll talk about it. You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Oh, and I already know you're keeping it locked to Monopoly Go. I'm addicted. Let me just say it. And in Monopoly Go, not only can you troll your friends, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums, big prizes there, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There is always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on with Monopoly Go. Thank you so much for making this Thursday episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. For the everydayers, if you want to take that everydayer experience to the next level, you heard we're answering questions on this episode from the Locked On Canes insiders. You can become a Locked On Canes insider by clicking the link in the show description below. You could try it free for 14 days. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours with transfer portal scoops, show updates, breaking news. If you like it, after 14 days, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. Try it free. Become a Locked On Canes insider today. Let's see. Where are we on these questions? We get one. This is a good question. Alex, I have a question concerning if other teams' recruiters are using some of the investigations into John Ruiz's law practice to dissuade recruits from Miami. From my understanding, any contract negotiated between a player and an NIL collective or company in Ruiz's case, really doesn't have much to do with the law firm that coordinates the contract. He's just the go-between. Is that assumption correct? Okay, not only is your assumption correct, but I also feel like the whole point now is moot. And you're probably right, though, that other teams are probably still trying to use the John Ruiz investigations and the Life Wallet, their stock price. I think the stock, I don't know. I don't follow their stock, but it may have bounced back. But I know it was having trouble for a while. But if they are using that for negative recruitment, like here's the reality. And I'm not just saying this. This is 1,000% true. John Ruiz is no longer a factor in Miami's NIL situation. Like that's old news. There's been a complete or virtually complete, because I think he is still just a little bit involved, but there's been almost a complete pivot away. And people don't seem to understand that there are multiple billionaires in Miami who are actual factors behind the scenes when he is not. So anyone who brings up Ruiz in 2024 for negative recruiting just doesn't even know what's going on. I think that's the most important point. And then let me make a second point to John Ruiz's credit, just because he probably should be suing some of the people out there who have been bad mouthing him and just making stuff up. Because to his credit, he's never missed an NIL payment. Never missed a payment with any of his athletes when he was heavily involved in NIL. Where I see some Florida State burner account on Twitter is going to talk about checks are bouncing in Miami. Ask that burner for his source. There is none. It's fiction. Okay. So, whatever negative recruiting that goes into that's not the thing. I mean, you look at you look at the incredible stuff that the Canes Connection Collective is doing right now, one of the best collectives in the entire country. In fact, if you want to join up the Canes Connection Collective, you can get a deal through my promo code LOCKED, LOCKED. Sign up with my promo code LOCKED, and they're going to give you 20% off your first month at any of their 6 membership tiers. So that's where it's at right now. All right. We get a question about, hey, defensive roster cuts and moving on do not make sense, he says. We are way weaker today than a week ago, specifically at defensive tackle, defensive end, and safety. He says, offensive roster, I am surprised none of our wide receivers have entered the portal. I would say that, if I'm led to believe that more players could at least, if not enter the portal, if they've already entered the portal, more names are going to be revealed. One of those maybe could be a wide receiver. We'll see. But as far as what you're saying about the defense, okay, yeah, Miami's loss, they've had several players leave through the portal. The most notable losses on defense in terms of guys who were going to play this year, the most notable losses were Jared Harrison-Hunt at defensive tackle and Savion Riley at safety. The other players who left, not taking anything away from them because there are a lot of bright talents, but the reality is the other players who left were not factors in the 2 deep roster right now, not factors in the depth chart. We're not going to play much this year. So, yes, at this very moment, to your point, at this very moment, Miami's defense, the offense is strengthened clearly. Miami's defense might look weaker right now after especially losing Harrison-Hunt and Savion Riley. Keep in mind, though, Miami did add a solid linebacker, Jalen Alderman, who makes the linebacker core stronger. Miami's staff is really high on the corner that they added, Diani Hill, who came in last weekend. But yes, with Hunt and Riley being the most significant losses, keep in mind, if Miami can bring in Simeon Barrow, who I believe is better than Jared Harrison-Hunt, and if Miami can find a quality safety who might be as good or better than Savion Riley, I think they still have a chance to come out ahead. So the whole point, my point is, you can talk about how the defensive roster looks right now compared to a week ago. Let's let this play out and finish first, right? I mean, if I'm to assume Miami is going to add potentially a really good defensive tackle and maybe another really good defensive back within the next few days, maybe we could still come out ahead in this thing. Offensively, though, there's no question Miami's gotten better. A question from Steve in Port Orange, Florida says, hey, I heard Max Chadwick say yesterday, we had Max on from Pro Football Focus. He said yesterday that Damian Martinez had a better O-line last year at Oregon State. He says, we've heard that Cam Ward's O-line last year was not as good as Miami's. How good will Miami's O-line be this year? And yeah, listen, Oregon State, if you go by players drafted, Oregon State did have a really good offensive line, and like maybe you could argue better than Miami's last year, just based on Javion Cohen going undrafted and Matt Lee getting drafted in the 7th round. But the point about Cam Ward, irrefutable. His offensive line at Washington State was not good. It's much better here at Miami. And to answer your question, Miami's offensive line, I think, is in really good shape. I think the only spot where the jury is somewhat still out right now is center. And I say that just because I don't know if Zach Carpenter is going to be what Matt Lee was last year. I mean, Carpenter did pretty well at Indiana. He's very experienced. He's a super senior graduate transfer. I just don't know if he's going to be what Lee was last year. I'll give him an opportunity to prove that to me, but there could be a bit of a step down there. But then, you got to remember the other starters on the offensive line. I think you've got a few opportunities at upgrades through players getting more experience. I mean, Jalen Rivers already really good, and he's entering his final year. I think Rivers is going to do really, really well at left tackle, as he has done, as he did last season, was consistently good. With Inez Cooper, who had an awesome spring, he looks dominant on the field at right guard. And CeCe Maui-Noa is going to be a year older because, he had a few true freshman mistakes last year. I think that guy is going to grow leaps and bounds. He was very young last year. And, at left guard, you're replacing Javion Cohen, yes, but I think the potential of either Samson Okunlola or Matthew McCoy at left guard, Miami's offensive line is going to be more than fine. I think Cam Ward is going to be super happy from that perspective when it comes to his protection. He's going to be super happy he made that move. And I don't think Damian Martinez is going to have too many sleepless nights. I think he's going to be A-okay behind Miami's offensive line. It's going to be fine. Get a question. It says, hey, Donno, have you drunk the Kool-Aid yet for this team in the upcoming season, or are you close? You know, I talk on this show very, very enthusiastically about Miami's players. And I mean it. Like, I talk very enthusiastically about Miami's players. I cover Miami's recruiting and Miami's transfer portal with a vigor you don't find too many other places. And so a lot of times people will confuse my enthusiasm for cockiness. I'm not cocky. Like, I'm not one of these people who's like, we got Ward, we got Martinez, 16-0, national title, college football playoff, ACC championship. I'm not one of those guys. I come on here every day and I give you reasons why I believe Ward could be the best quarterback Miami has had in a very long time, why I believe this could be the best Miami offense in a very, very long time. We do talk about concerns for the defense. But I don't want anyone to confuse my enthusiasm and you know the stats that we give you on the show. I don't want anyone to confuse that with cockiness. Like, here's where I'm at. I don't drink Kool-Aid. I sit back, I observe, and if I just look at the types of moves Miami has been making in a recruiting standpoint, I really appreciated what they did on the field during spring football. I was very impressed with the way that played out. I think Miami's put them in position to contend for something, right? I think they can absolutely contend to be one of the final two in the ACC and play in the ACC championship game. You know, now that the college football playoff, now that it's a 12 team, I think Miami should be able to at least be in that conversation for a top 12 seed. And that's where I am. I think there's no reason why a roster like this cannot contend. And I'm pretty high on the coaching staff. No reason why they can't contend, but I'm not a Kool-Aid drinker and I don't make proclamations. They've got to prove it to me on the field, because I know that there are plenty of times over the last 20 years where, you know, we thought, hey, Miami could really do something this year. They should win the ACC this year, and it hasn't happened. So I'm not a Kool-Aid drinker. I'm someone who gives you, you know, good and bad. You know, I call it like I see it, or at least I try to. And I'm optimistic that they can put themselves in some important conversations this year. How about that? Still got more to come on this episode of Locked On Canes. Good question from Dat Dude 239 about where certain young players are going to fall in the depth chart this coming year. And also, this is an interesting one, a question about who the most impactful departures are going to be. Players who have left Miami and could make a big impact on their next team. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. And I already know you're keeping it locked to Game Time. Folks, this is the only ticket app that I use because I get amazing deals, whether I'm buying tickets months out or if I'm buying tickets morning of, sometimes even an hour after an event has already started. I am finding incredible deals on the Game Time app. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which means getting playoff tickets is even faster and easier. Now, I know you're not getting any more Heat playoff tickets, but maybe you want to go watch some other teams in the postseason. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Folks, you can save up to 60% off buying last-minute deals for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. I love how the all-in pricing at Game Time, they show you exactly what you're going to pay right up front. They don't slap on hidden fees at the end. You get panoramic views from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's also now available on the Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus national shows who cover every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV Channels app. I am Alex Donno. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch. Jordan asks, which player that is transferred out do you think will have the biggest impact this year and in their career? Okay, so I can give you different answers based on short term and long term. I thought about this a lot. I think the player that could make the biggest impact in the short term. Now, he transferred in the first window back in the winter. Colby Young at Georgia. He's doing really well there. He was really dominant in spring for them, and Georgia's the team that I expect to win the national championship this year. So, I mean, how can I not say Colby Young, where Young might end up being a starter or a top rotational receiver on a title-winning team in his final year in college? I think that's a guy who could have a big impact. Obviously, there are others, like I think Jared Harrison Hunt could have a nice impact at SMU because he's a plug-and-play starting ready defensive tackle. As far as the long term goes, I could really see Jaden Wayne being a guy that in a couple years we're going to look back on and say, man, I wish he was still here. He was falling a little bit behind in spring, so I think he was worried about how much playing time he was going to get here. But we know how talented Wayne is. If he can put it all together, and he's from the Pacific Northwest, so he transferred close to home. He's in Washington now. So I think Jaden Wayne, this was a high-level 4-star guy coming out of high school. I think he can be really good. I think Nigel Kelly can do really, really well at UCF. He's got great bend, natural pass rushing ability. And another one in the long term, I'm going to be very curious to watch the development for the next couple of years of Jakari Brown. I think Brown can really thrive in UCF's offense. Whether he takes over this year there and next year, I think KJ Jefferson probably starts there this season. But within a year and a half, I'm very curious to see what Brown can do with the Knights. Get a question from Dat Dude 239 who says, "Hey, could you give us insight on the depth chart for certain players from the 2023 recruiting class, like Bobby and Robbie Washington, Chris Johnson, Riley Williams, Jackson Carver?" Yeah, I'll start. I'll go in order of the names you put out there, Dat Dude. Bobby Washington, he's been rising since last season. I think that's a big reason why he's still here, because he's been moving up. I think a lot of the guys who left did so because they were trending downwards, not upwards. Washington is definitely trending upwards. So I think Miami's top 4 linebackers on paper right now, fall camp is going to tell us more. But right now, I think Miami's top 4 linebackers are Kiko, Besaint, Alderman, who just transferred in, and Popo. But I think Bobby Washington is pretty close to being in the mix for like a 3rd or a 4th spot, if he may be in a 5th spot right now. Again, this is all just my opinion, all right? I don't want to make it sound like, I'm not the coach. It's just my opinion, okay? So, but I think Bobby is going to be in that mix, and he's going to play this year. So, Robbie Washington, his twin on the other side of the football, he's in a similar situation. He's in the mix with the young and hungry receivers, because I think Miami's top 4 receivers, now 3 start, so there's a lot of rotation there. I think Miami's top 4 guys obviously are Jacoby George, Sam Brown, and Isaiah Horton. Then you've got in that next group, which I believe Robbie is in, Ray Joseph, Robbie Washington, JoJo Trader, Nye Carr. That's kind of the next wave, and we'll know more about the pecking order after fall camp. And I've not forgotten about Chance Robinson, who enrolls this summer. Now, he's a little bit behind Nye Carr and JoJo because they've been here and he hasn't, but I think Chance Robinson could play a factor there either. So there's just a lot we don't know about how the whole receiver rotation is going to play out, because there are a lot of talented players there. You also ask about Chris Johnson at running back. He could be anywhere between 2nd string to 4th string, and I think he will play, but he'll be anywhere from 2nd string to 4th string. It depends on a few factors. How quickly is Mark Fletcher going to be healthy again? How good is A.J. Allen going to look in the fall? He missed the spring. He was a prominent guy in the rotation last year. But Chris Johnson, he helped himself with a good spring. Got the majority of the first team reps in spring. Of course, Damian Martinez now is your first stringer. Fletcher would be the number 2, will be the number 2 when healthy. I don't know exactly when he's going to be ready to go. So Chris Johnson, he's going to play. And I hope they find creative ways to get him on the field, not just lining him up conventionally. As far as tight end, I like Riley Williams. I like him as the number 2 tight end behind a healthy Elijah Arroyo. I also expect Elijah Lofton to get on the field a lot, but probably bouncing around at multiple positions, where Riley, more of a conventional tight end. Jackson Carver, probably 4th or 5th string, because you got to include Cam McCormick into that mix as well. Oh, man. I got more questions I want to answer, folks, but I'm going to keep yammering for another 50 minutes, and nobody wants that. So I'm going to answer more questions on tomorrow's episode. We're going to have multiple episodes tomorrow because I think we're going to have some player interviews tomorrow, and I'm going to do a crossover episode tomorrow with Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators. I know it's a long way till August 31st, but Brandon and we talked so much trash about that matchup coming up in the Swamp that we wanted to take it to the airwaves. We wanted to take it to YouTube. We wanted to take it to all your favorite podcast channels. So we will be talking a little Miami versus Gator tomorrow on Locked On Canes. We'll do a crossover episode with Brandon. And I want to thank you guys so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. If there is any breaking news on incoming or outgoing transfers, we will have it covered right here on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.